The kind of Carolina heat that clings to your skin even after the sun goes down. Audrey Grant pulled her 2011 Camry up to pump 2. The car had a dent in the rear quarter panel she'd never bothered to fix, and a crack running across the windshield like a river on a map. She killed the engine and sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel. 14 hours. 14 hours since she'd left the house that morning, and every one of them sat heavy in her shoulders. She stepped out and stretched. Plain gray hoodie, dark jeans, hair pulled back in a low bun that had come loose sometime around hour 10. No jewelry, no makeup, nothing about her that would make you look twice. She swiped her card, selected regular, and lifted the nozzle into the tank. The pump clicked and hummed. She leaned against the car and pulled out her phone. One new message from Terrence, her partner back at the apartment. "Stay safe tonight. Leftover pasta in the fridge." She typed back a thumbs up and slid the phone into her pocket. Audrey knew this stretch of road. Grew up 20 minutes east, in a neighborhood where the sidewalks cracked and the streetlights worked every other Tuesday. She'd ridden her bike past this station 100 times as a kid. Back then, her mother had a rule: be home before dark. Not because of curfew, because of what dark meant for a black girl on a rural highway in Ridgemont County. Some rules never stopped making sense. The pump clicked off at $32. She returned the nozzle, screwed the gas cap tight, and reached for her door handle. That's when the headlights hit her. A patrol car rolled into the station lot. Slow. No sirens, no flashers, just the quiet crawl of a Crown Victoria with its high beams cutting through the dusk like a searchlight. It angled across the lot and parked directly behind her Camry, close enough that she couldn't back out if she tried. The engine idled. The headlights stayed on, pinning her in a column of white light. Audrey's hand rested on her door handle. She didn't open it. She didn't move. 2 doors opened. 2 officers stepped out in near-perfect sync. The driver was broad-shouldered, buzz-cut, mirrored sunglasses, even though the sun had been gone for 40 minutes. He adjusted his belt, the one with the taser, the baton, the Glock, and walked toward her with the kind of stride that expected the world to move out of its way. The passenger was younger, thinner, trailing half a step behind, like a shadow that hadn't learned its own shape yet. The broad one stopped 6 feet from her, feet apart, chin up, one hand resting on his holster. "Evening, ma'am." His voice carried the flat politeness of a man who used courtesy as a weapon. "Step away from the vehicle, please." Audrey let go of the door handle. She turned to face him, hands open at her sides, feet planted. She didn't flinch. She didn't hurry. Her pulse held steady at 62 beats per minute, the same rate it had held through 2 active shooter drills, 1 hostage negotiation, and 11 months of silence. She'd been expecting this. "Ma'am, I said step away from the vehicle." Officer Bryce Dawson repeated himself the way men repeat themselves when they're not used to being made to wait. Louder. Slower. Like volume was a substitute for authority. Audrey stepped forward. 1 step. Measured. She kept her hands where he could see them. Open palms, fingers spread. The universal language of "I am not a threat." She'd practiced this posture in the mirror. Not for training. For survival. "Can I ask what this is about, officer?" Dawson tilted his head. The mirrored sunglasses reflected the gas station lights back at her in twin streaks of white. "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for." "What description?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned to his partner. "Whitmore, run the plates." Officer Kyle Whitmore, early 20s, clean-shaven, the kind of face that still carried baby fat in the cheeks, nodded and walked back toward the cruiser. His hand shook slightly as he reached for his radio. Nervous. New. The type who followed orders not because he believed in them, but because he hadn't yet learned what it cost to say no. Audrey watched him go, then turned back to Dawson. "Officer, I'd like your badge number, please." Dawson's jaw tightened. A small thing, a twitch in the muscle just below his ear. Most people wouldn't catch it. Audrey caught everything. "You'll get what you need when I say so." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the spearmint gum he was working between his molars. "License and registration. Now." She reached for her back pocket, slowly, deliberately, narrating her movements the way every black parent in America teaches their children to do during a traffic stop. "I'm reaching into my back pocket for my wallet. My license is inside." She handed it over. He took it with 2 fingers, like it might be contaminated, and barely glanced at the name before tossing it onto the hood of his cruiser. The plastic case skidded across the paint and stopped against the windshield wiper. "Registration's in the glove box," Audrey said. "May I get it?" "Stay where you are. Whitmore." He snapped his fingers without looking back. "Check the glove box." Whitmore had returned from the cruiser. He hesitated, glanced at Audrey, then walked to the Camry's passenger side and opened the door. He leaned in, popped the glove box, and pulled out a small folder of documents. Oil change receipts, insurance card, registration. He brought them to Dawson, who fanned through the papers like a man shuffling a deck of cards he had no intention of playing. "Where are you coming from this late?" Dawson asked, eyes still on the papers. "Work." "What kind of work?" He looked up. The question wasn't a question. It was a measurement, a way of placing her in whatever box he'd already built in his head. "I work in consulting." True enough. Close enough. The kind of answer that gives nothing and takes nothing. Dawson snorted, a single huff through his nose. Consulting. He said the word the way you'd say unicorn, like he'd never seen one and didn't believe they existed. By now, 3 other people at the station had stopped what they were doing. A man in a pickup at Pump 1 stood with his arms crossed, watching. A woman loading groceries into her minivan had frozen mid-bag. And a teenager, 16, maybe 17, lanky, wearing a faded Hornets jersey, had his phone out, camera pointed squarely at the scene. The red recording dot pulsed in the corner of his screen, Dawson noticed. He straightened up, squared his shoulders toward the kid. "Hey, turn that off." The teenager didn't move, didn't lower the phone. "I said turn it off, son. This is an active police matter." "I'm on public property," the kid said. His voice cracked on property, but he held his ground. "I'm allowed to film." Dawson took a step toward him. Audrey watched the weight shift in his boots, the slight forward lean of a man accustomed to making people smaller. "Bryce." Whitmore's voice. Quiet. A warning wrapped in a name. "Don't." Dawson stopped. He turned back to Audrey, and whatever anger the teenager had triggered now redirected onto her like a river finding a new channel. "Hands on the vehicle! Spread your feet!" Audrey placed her palms flat on the warm hood of her Camry. She spread her feet shoulder-width apart. The metal was still hot from the engine, and it pressed into her skin like a brand. She stared straight ahead. At the cracked convenience store window. At the reflection of a woman being treated like a suspect for the crime of filling her gas tank while black. Behind her, Dawson's radio crackled. Whitmore's voice came through from the cruiser. "Plates are clean. No warrants. No flags." Dawson keyed his shoulder mic. "Copy." He didn't release her. Didn't step back. Didn't say, "Sorry, ma'am. Our mistake." Instead, he said the 6 words that told Audrey everything she needed to know about how the rest of the night would go. "Pop the trunk. I want to look." "I'm not consenting to a search," Audrey said. Her voice was level, practiced. The kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly where every legal line sits and watching someone sprint toward it. Dawson leaned in. Wasn't asking for consent. He walked to the back of the Camry and popped the trunk himself. The latch gave with a dull thud, and the trunk lid rose slowly on tired hydraulics, revealing the organized chaos of a life lived mostly in a car. A gym bag with a broken zipper, a navy windbreaker folded into a tight square, a half-empty case of bottled water, the plastic wrap peeling at the corners, a pair of running shoes, soles caked with red Carolina clay, and tucked against the rear wall, pressed between the spare tire well and the side panel, a black leather briefcase with two brass combination locks. Dawson reached for it. His fingers closed around the handle, and he lifted it, testing the weight first, then pulling it free. "That's personal property," Audrey said. She hadn't moved from her position at the hood, palms still flat on warm metal. "You don't have a warrant, and you don't have probable cause. I'm asking you, formally, to stop." Dawson set the briefcase on the asphalt. The leather scraped against the rough surface. He crouched beside it, tried the left lock, then the right. Both held. He shook it. Something shifted inside. Paper, maybe. Documents. Nothing that rattled. Nothing that clinked. Nothing that justified what he was doing. Open it. No. The word hung between them, like a held breath. In the fluorescent half-light of the station, the teenager's phone kept recording. The man in the pickup hadn't moved. The woman with the groceries had gotten into her minivan, but hadn't started the engine. Just sat behind the wheel, watching through the windshield, one hand pressed flat against the glass. A second customer pulled into the lot, a woman in a white sedan. She took one look at the scene, at the flashing lights reflected in the puddle of spilled coolant near pump 1, and backed out without stopping. The station was becoming a place people drove away from. Dawson stood up, slowly. He hooked his thumbs into his belt and looked at Audrey the way a man looks at a locked door he's decided to kick open. "You're being uncooperative, ma'am, and in my experience, people who refuse a search have something to hide. That gives me reasonable suspicion." "That's not how reasonable suspicion works, officer." "Don't tell me how to do my job." He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. Requesting backup at the Shell on Route 9. One female suspect, uncooperative, refusing vehicle search. Possible concealment." The radio crackled back. Audrey heard the response before Dawson did. Her ears had been trained to parse frequencies. "Sergeant on duty. En route. 4 minutes." She counted the seconds in her head. Not out of fear, out of documentation. Every minute mattered. Every violation stacked like bricks in a wall she'd been building for almost a year. The backup arrived in 3.5. A second cruiser rolled into the lot with its lights off. Subtle, like it was trying not to wake the neighbors. The driver's door opened slowly, and out stepped Sergeant Vance Coleman. Coleman was 53 years old, silver at the temples, a gut that pressed against his duty belt like a reminder of every free meal he'd ever taken from the diners on his patrol route. He'd been running the night shift in Ridgemont County for 15 years, which meant he'd been the last word on every traffic stop, every arrest, every complaint that had ever crossed a desk in this jurisdiction. The complaints always disappeared. The body cam footage always malfunctioned, and the reports always read the same way. Suspect was aggressive. Officer acted appropriately. He walked up to Dawson. They exchanged words, low, quick, the way men talk when they don't want to be quoted. Coleman glanced at Audrey, then at the briefcase sitting on the asphalt, then back at Audrey. His eyes traveled from her face to her hoodie, to her jeans, to her worn sneakers. He was measuring her, pricing her, deciding how much trouble she was worth. He made his decision in under 5 seconds. "Cuff her. We'll sort it out at the station." Dawson moved fast, faster than he'd moved all night. He grabbed Audrey's right wrist first, pulled it behind her back, then the left. The handcuffs closed with a metallic snap that echoed off the gas station awning. The steel was cold against her skin, too tight. She felt the edge of the cuff bite into the bone of her left wrist, metal pressing against the tendon until it ached. She didn't wince. She'd worn cuffs before, in training, in simulations, in a warehouse in Baltimore where she'd spent 3 days undercover with a methamphetamine ring before the extraction team came through the wall. This was nothing. This was Tuesday. But the people watching didn't know that. The mother in the minivan covered her mouth with both hands. The man in the pickup finally moved. He pulled out his own phone and started recording. The teenager lowered his camera for just a moment, swallowed hard, then raised it again. His hands were shaking now, the image on his screen trembling like a heat mirage. An older black man had come out of the convenience store. 70, maybe older, white stubble, a VFW cap faded from navy to something closer to gray. He stood in the doorway with a bottle of sweet tea in his hand and watched Audrey being marched across the lot toward the patrol car. He shook his head, slowly, not in surprise, in recognition. He'd seen this before. He'd seen this his whole life. His father had seen it before him. Coleman opened the rear door of Dawson's cruiser. Audrey ducked her head and lowered herself onto the hard plastic seat. The cage partition was inches from her face. Through the metal mesh, she could see Dawson tossing her briefcase into the trunk of his own car, like it was a piece of luggage at an airport carousel. Whitmore stood off to the side, arms folded tight across his chest, staring at his shoes. He hadn't said a word since the cuffing. His face carried the particular shade of pale that comes when a man realizes he's crossed a line, but can't find the courage to say so. The cruiser door slammed shut. The sound was final, absolute, like a period at the end of a sentence no one asked to read. Audrey sat in the back and let her eyes travel across the scene one more time. She noted the cruiser number, 714. She noted Coleman's badge, 2231. She noted the time on the dashboard clock, 9:47 p.m. She noted Whitmore's silence, Dawson's swagger, Coleman's 5-second verdict. She noted everything. Because Audrey Grant had been noting everything for 11 months. Every unlawful stop, every fabricated charge, every body cam that conveniently died, every complaint that vanished between the filing cabinet and the shredder. And tonight, these 3 officers had just given her the last piece she needed. They just didn't know it yet. Nah, this is insane. Imagine you're just pumping gas, minding your own business, and suddenly you're face down on a cop car in handcuffs. For what? Because of how you look? And nobody around you says a single word. You tell me how that feels. The Ridgemont County substation sat at the bottom of a hill on Clarkson Road, a 1-story brick building with narrow windows and a flat roof that collected rainwater in pools no one ever drained. The American flag out front had frayed at the edge. Across the street, half hidden by a row of overgrown boxwoods, a Confederate memorial stood on a concrete pedestal. A bronze soldier with a rifle at rest, staring south toward nothing. They brought Audrey in through the side entrance. No booking desk, no intake officer, just a hallway that smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax, ending in a room with a metal table, 2 plastic chairs, and a camera mounted in the corner that hadn't had a working light since March. Coleman sat across from her. He hadn't removed her cuffs. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, studying her the way a man studies a crossword puzzle he's already decided isn't worth finishing. "So," he said, "let's talk about what happened tonight." "I was getting gas," Audrey said. Your officers approached me without cause, searched my vehicle without consent or a warrant, and arrested me without probable cause. That's what happened tonight. Coleman smiled. Not a warm smile, the kind that bends the mouth without reaching the eyes. You know, girls like you always think you know your rights. Watch a couple videos on the internet, and suddenly you're a constitutional scholar. Audrey said nothing. She let the sentence sit in the room like a stain on a tablecloth, visible, ugly, and entirely his. Dawson appeared in the doorway. Phone's clean, nothing on it. He said it like he was disappointed, like he'd been expecting to find a confession in her text messages. Plates? Coleman asked. Clean, no priors, not even a parking ticket. Coleman's fingers drummed on the table. A slow rhythm. The sound of a man whose narrative was falling apart, but who wasn't ready to admit it. What about the briefcase? Locked. She won't give us the combination. Then we hold her until she does. Audrey tilted her head. On what charge? Coleman leaned forward. Disorderly conduct, obstruction, take your pick. He stood up, the chair legs scraping against the floor like a match strike. You're going to spend the night here, ma'am. Maybe by morning you'll feel more cooperative. He walked out. Dawson followed. The door closed with a heavy click, and Audrey was alone in the room with the dead camera and the buzzing fluorescent tube above her head. She sat perfectly still. She listened to their footsteps fade down the hallway. She heard Coleman's voice, muffled, distant, say something to Dawson that ended in laughter. The low, easy laughter of men who believed they were untouchable. They had no idea. 212 miles northeast, in a windowless office on the 4th floor of the FBI field office in Charlotte, Supervisory Special Agent Nora Pemberton was reviewing case files when her phone buzzed. She picked it up. A Twitter notification. Not her personal account, but the monitoring feed her team used to track law enforcement incidents in the counties under investigation. The teenager's video had been posted 47 minutes ago. It already had 8,000 views and climbing. The caption read, Cops arrest black woman at gas station for pumping gas. Ridgemont County. This has to stop. Hashtag Ridgemont Gas Station. Pemberton tapped the video. She watched 6 seconds of it, the moment the cuffs went on, and her stomach dropped. She recognized the hoodie. She recognized the car. She recognized the woman. She stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the filing cabinet. Connors, she called across the office. Get me the tactical team on the line. Now! Agent Connors looked up from his desk. What's wrong? Pemberton was already reaching for the secure phone, the one that bypassed every local switchboard and connected directly to the operations center. Her hand was steady, but her voice had the tight precision of a woman who understood that the next 60 minutes would determine the fate of an 11-month investigation. They just arrested Mockingbird. Connors went white. Mockingbird was the operation code name, the name that appeared on no public document, no email, no text message. It existed only in classified briefings and the heads of 7 people in the entire bureau. Pemberton dialed. The line connected in 2 rings. This is SSA Pemberton, badge number 7741. I need an emergency extraction authorized for Operation Mockingbird. Asset has been compromised. Not by the targets, by their own department. She's being held at the Ridgemont County substation on fabricated charges. She paused, listened. Then, negative. We are not burning the investigation. We are accelerating it. I want a full tactical team, DOJ Civil Rights Division on standby, and a federal magistrate ready to sign warrants. We move at first light. She hung up, walked to the window. The Charlotte skyline glittered in the distance, indifferent and bright. Somewhere in Ridgemont County, in a room with a dead camera, Audrey Grant sat in handcuffs and waited. Not for rescue, not for mercy, for morning. Because morning was when everything would change. The holding cell was 8 feet by 6. Concrete walls painted the color of old teeth. A metal bench bolted to the floor. A steel toilet with no seat. A single fluorescent tube behind a wire cage on the ceiling that buzzed at a frequency designed to prevent sleep. Audrey sat on the bench with her back against the wall. The cuffs were off now. Coleman had removed them before putting her in the cell. A small mercy that wasn't mercy at all, but procedure. Her left wrist throbbed where the metal had pressed too tight. A thin red line circled the bone like a bracelet she hadn't asked for. She closed her eyes. Not to sleep. To think. 11 months. 11 months of building this case, one document at a time. She transferred into the region under a fabricated consulting cover, a background so boring no one would bother to look twice. She'd rented an apartment in Ridgemont, shopped at the local grocery store, attended a church on Sundays. She drove the speed limit. She paid her taxes on time. She became invisible. And every night, she logged onto a secure server and filed her reports. The stops were the first thing she documented. 63 traffic stops in her first 4 months of observation, all in neighborhoods east of the river, all involving Black or Latino drivers, all for reasons that evaporated under scrutiny. Broken taillight that wasn't broken. Failure to signal on an empty road. Matching a description that never had a source. Then the evidence planting. She'd recorded it 3 times through a pinhole camera concealed in her dashboard. Officers reaching into their own pockets before reaching into a suspect's car. Small bags, white powder, enough to turn a traffic stop into a felony. Then the body cameras. 22 incidents where footage should have existed and didn't. Coleman signed off on every missing file with the same 2 words: equipment malfunction. Audrey had built the case the way her mentor at Quantico had taught her, brick by brick, with no gaps, no assumptions, nothing a defense attorney could wedge a crowbar into. She had names, dates, badge numbers, GPS logs, surveillance footage, witness statements from people who'd been too afraid to talk to anyone but a federal agent with a promise of protection. And now she was sitting in a cell in the very building she'd been investigating, arrested by the very men she was about to bring down. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent tube flickered. Once, twice. Held. A memory surfaced, unbidden, sharp. Her brother, Terrence. Not her partner, her younger brother, same name. He'd been 19, driving home from a friend's house on a Saturday night in this same county. Same kind of road, same kind of dark. 2 officers pulled him over. Said he was swerving. He wasn't. They pulled him out of the car. Said he was resisting. He wasn't. They put him on the ground, face in the gravel, knee on his back. He came home with a fractured orbital bone and a charge for resisting arrest. The charges were dropped 6 weeks later. The officers were cleared after an internal review. The body cam footage was, of course, missing. Terrence never drove at night again. He was 29 now, and he still took an Uber home after dark. 10 years later, and the fear sat in his body like a second skeleton. That was why Audrey had taken the assignment. Not for the promotion, not for the commendation letter, for the look in her brother's eyes when he heard a siren, that flinch, that tightening of the jaw, that instinct to make himself smaller. No one should have to make themselves smaller. Down the hallway, she heard voices. Coleman and Dawson, still on shift, still at their desks. The words were muffled, but the tone carried. Casual, relaxed, the sound of men eating takeout and telling stories. She heard Dawson laugh, then Coleman. Another one off the streets. Dawson. She'll learn. Audrey's hands rested on her knees. Her fingers were still. Her breathing was even. But something behind her eyes had shifted. A quiet recalibration, like a scope adjusting for distance. At 6 in the morning, Coleman came to the cell. He told her the charges: disorderly conduct, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest. 3 charges, all fiction, all designed to justify a night that should never have happened. She asked for her phone call. Coleman leaned against the door frame and crossed his arms. Phone's broken. Audrey looked at him. For the first time all night, she let something show on her face. Not anger, not despair. Something closer to patience. The kind that comes from knowing exactly how a story ends, while everyone else is still guessing. Coleman didn't recognize it. He saw a woman in a holding cell with no lawyer, no phone, and no leverage. He saw someone who'd been handled, managed, filed away. He had no idea he was looking at the person who'd already ended his career. He just hadn't been notified yet. At 8:47 a.m., the sun was already pressing heat into the asphalt of the Ridgemont County substation parking lot. The flag hung limp. The Confederate memorial across the street cast a long shadow that reached almost to the front door, like it was trying to get inside. Coleman was at his desk. Third cup of coffee. Feet up. He was filling out the incident report from the previous night, the one that would describe Audrey Grant as combative, uncooperative, and possibly intoxicated, even though she hadn't had a drink in 11 months. The pen moved easily. He'd written reports like this 100 times. The words came from muscle memory, not truth. Dawson was in the break room, working through a gas station donut and scrolling his phone. Whitmore sat at the front desk, staring at nothing, still wearing the expression of a man who hadn't slept despite being given every opportunity to. None of them heard the vehicles until they were already in the lot. 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans, tinted windows, federal plates. They pulled in simultaneously, one at the front entrance, one at the side door, one blocking the exit, and stopped with the kind of coordinated precision that doesn't come from county-level training. Doors opened, all at once. 6 agents in dark suits and tactical vests stepped out and formed a line. 2 more positioned themselves at the building's side entrance. Every badge caught the morning sun. Supervisory Special Agent Nora Pemberton walked through the front door first. She was 51, lean, silver-streaked hair pulled back tight. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse and carried a leather folder with the Department of Justice seal embossed on the cover. Behind her came 2 attorneys from the DOJ Civil Rights Division, a man and a woman, both carrying bankers' boxes of documents. Behind them, 4 more agents. The hallway, which had felt empty and forgotten 12 hours ago, was suddenly full of federal authority. The front desk officer, a young deputy who hadn't been involved in the previous night's arrest, stood up so fast his chair tipped over. Who are you? Pemberton didn't slow down. She flashed her credentials, blue and gold, the kind of ID that makes local badges look like library cards, and kept walking toward the bullpen. Coleman heard the commotion. He swung his feet off the desk and stood up, coffee mug still in hand. He came around the corner and found himself face to face with Pemberton and a wall of federal agents. "Can I help you?" he said. The confidence in his voice was a reflex. His eyes told a different story. Pemberton stopped. She looked at him the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, clinical, certain, already knowing what she'd find. "Sergeant Vance Coleman. I'm Supervisory Special Agent Nora Pemberton, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Charlotte Field Office." She opened the leather folder and removed a single sheet of paper. "I'm here for my agent." The coffee mug didn't drop, but the hand holding it stopped moving entirely, frozen at chest height, as if the signal between Coleman's brain and his fingers had been severed. "Your agent?" Special Agent Audrey Grant has been conducting an authorized federal investigation into systemic civil rights violations within the Ridgemont County Police Department. The investigation, designated Operation Mockingbird, has been active for 11 months, authorized by a federal magistrate, and overseen by the DOJ Civil Rights Division. She paused. Let every word land. "Last night, your officers detained Agent Grant without probable cause, searched her vehicle without a warrant, and arrested her on fabricated charges. Every moment of that encounter was recorded by federal surveillance equipment. Additionally, Agent Grant's investigation has documented 147 unlawful traffic stops, 23 cases of evidence tampering, and 8 cases of excessive force, all originating from officers under your direct command." Dawson appeared in the break room doorway. The donut was gone. His face was the color of old paper. He looked at Pemberton. He looked at the agents. He looked at Coleman, waiting for the sergeant to say something, to fix this, to make it go away, the way Coleman had always made things go away. Coleman said nothing. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. A fish on a dock. Pemberton handed the single sheet of paper to the DOJ attorney at her right. "These are the federal warrants, signed this morning by Judge Patricia Emerson of the Western District of North Carolina. They authorize the seizure of all personnel files, body camera footage, incident reports, and digital communications from this facility." She turned to the agent at her left. "Bring her out." The agent walked down the hallway toward the holding cells. 30 seconds later, Audrey Grant emerged. She walked steadily, unhurried, shoulders back. A female federal agent walked beside her, carrying a black duffel bag. They stopped in the center of the bullpen. The agent unzipped the bag and handed Audrey 3 items, one at a time. Her FBI credentials, a gold badge, and a blue identification card bearing her photo, her name, and the words Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent. Her service weapon, a Glock 19M in a leather holster. And her phone, still in the evidence bag Dawson had sealed the night before. Audrey clipped the badge to her belt. She holstered the weapon on her right hip. She unsealed the evidence bag, removed her phone, and powered it on. Then she looked up. She looked at Dawson first. He took a step backward. An involuntary retreat, the body understanding what the mind hadn't caught up to. She looked at Whitmore. He was sitting at the front desk, both hands flat on the surface, staring at her badge like it was a grenade with the pin pulled. She looked at Coleman. He still hadn't moved. The coffee mug was now trembling in his hand, sending tiny ripples across the surface of the liquid inside. Pemberton spoke one more time. Her voice carried the calm of a woman who had done this before and would do it again. "Sergeant Coleman, Officer Dawson, Officer Whitmore, you are each hereby notified that you are subjects of an active federal investigation. I strongly advise each of you to retain legal counsel immediately. Do not destroy, alter, or remove any documents, recordings, or communications related to your duties. Failure to comply will result in additional federal charges, including obstruction of justice." She closed the leather folder. "We're done here." Audrey walked out of the Ridgemont County substation at 9:03 a.m. The morning air was warm and clean and smelled like cut grass from the lot next door. She stepped into the sunlight and kept walking, past the Suburbans, past the Confederate Memorial, past the flag that hung limp above a building that would never operate the same way again. Behind her, she heard the sound of a coffee mug hitting the floor. She didn't look back. The suspensions came within 48 hours. Coleman, Dawson, and Whitmore, all three stripped of their badges, their weapons, and their access to the building they'd treated like a personal kingdom. The Ridgemont County Police Department was placed under federal oversight, effective immediately. A monitor appointed by the DOJ arrived on a Wednesday and didn't leave. The teenager's video was the match, but the investigation was the gasoline. By the time cable news picked up the story, the gas station footage had already crossed 14 million views. Every major network ran the clip. The moment the cuffs clicked shut, played in slow motion, narrated by anchors who used words like troubling and deeply concerning, are less polite. Hashtag Justice for Audrey trended nationally for 3 days. It was joined by hashtag Ridgemont County, hashtag Operation Mockingbird, and, briefly, fiercely, hashtag Cops versus FBI. The internet did what the internet does. It made the story impossible to ignore. A federal grand jury convened in Charlotte. The indictments came down like a hammer on glass. Sergeant Vance Coleman, 12 counts. Conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law. Obstruction of justice. Perjury. Falsification of police records. Destruction of evidence. Each count carried federal sentencing guidelines that made state charges look like parking tickets. Officer Bryce Dawson, 7 counts. Civil rights violations. Unlawful search and seizure. Filing false reports. Evidence tampering on 2 separate occasions, both captured on Audrey's concealed dashboard camera. Officer Kyle Whitmore, 3 counts. Civil rights violations and failure to intervene. The lightest charges of the 3, but federal charges nonetheless. His attorney filed for a cooperation agreement within a week. Whitmore, it turned out, was ready to talk. He'd been ready for a while. The community reacted the way communities react when a wound finally gets named. The old man from the gas station. His name was Harold Briggs, 74 years old, retired postal worker, Korean War veteran, gave an interview to a Charlotte reporter. He sat in a folding chair on his front porch and spoke in a voice that carried 60 years of this county's history. "I've lived here my whole life," he said. "Raised my children here. Buried my wife here. And I've watched officers like Coleman run this place like it belonged to them. Not to us. To them." He paused, adjusted his VFW cap. "This is the first time anyone fought back and won. And she didn't even have to raise her voice." The interview was viewed 9 million times. Harold Briggs received more mail that week than he had in the previous decade combined. Audrey gave one public statement. She stood outside the federal courthouse in Charlotte on a Tuesday morning, flanked by Pemberton and a DOJ spokesperson. She wore a charcoal suit. Her badge was visible on her belt. She spoke for 90 seconds. She said she didn't seek attention. She said the assignment was never about her. She said the community of Ridgemont County deserved a police force that served them, not one that hunted them. She said the people who came forward as witnesses during the investigation showed more courage than anyone would ever know. Then she stepped away from the microphone and didn't come back. The broader investigation spread like a root system. Audrey's 11 months of documentation didn't just implicate the Ridgemont County PD. It exposed patterns that connected to 5 neighboring departments. A culture, not a coincidence. The DOJ opened pattern or practice investigations into 3 of them. 2 more faced state-level reviews. Coleman's trial began in October. The courtroom was standing room only. The prosecution's case was surgical, built on the evidence Audrey had collected, corroborated by Whitmore's testimony, and anchored by the one thing Coleman had spent 15 years trying to eliminate: footage. The body camera recordings he thought were deleted had been backed up on a federal server. Every missing minute, every convenient malfunction, every traffic stop that had been erased from local records, but preserved in a digital vault Coleman never knew existed. The jury watched 14 hours of footage over 3 days. They saw officers planting evidence. They saw suspects handcuffed without cause. They saw Coleman, on camera, instruct a junior officer to lose a complaint filed by a 60-year-old woman who'd been pulled over 4 times in 1 month. Deliberation took 6 hours. Guilty. 9 of 12 counts. Coleman stood motionless as the verdict was read. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. Coleman didn't react. He stared at the table in front of him with the empty expression of a man who had spent his entire career believing the rules didn't apply to him, and was now learning, in the most public way possible, that they did. Sentencing: 8 years in federal prison. No parole. Dawson took a plea. 5 years. He would serve them at a minimum security facility in Virginia, far from Ridgemont County, far from the gas station, far from the woman he'd handcuffed for the crime of existing. 500 miles away, in a small apartment with blackout curtains and a second-hand couch, Terrence Grant watched the verdict on a television balanced on a stack of textbooks. He watched his sister's name scroll across the chyron. He watched Coleman's face as the word guilty was read aloud, 9 times, like a bell tolling. He cried. Not from sadness, not from relief, from something older and deeper. The feeling of a weight being lifted that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since he was 19 years old and face down on a gravel road with a knee on his back. He picked up his phone and texted his sister 2 words: "Thank you." 6 months later, the Shell station on Route 9 looked the same. Same 2 pumps, same sun-bleached awning, same convenience store with bars on the windows. The fluorescent lights still buzzed and flickered like they couldn't make up their minds. Some things don't change just because the world around them does. But other things do. The Ridgemont County Police Department had a new chief. Her name was Lieutenant Diane Holloway, the first black woman to hold the position in the department's 90-year history. She'd been recruited from a federal law enforcement background, brought in specifically to rebuild a department that had been gutted by its own corruption. Her first act was to install dashboard cameras in every patrol vehicle, cameras that uploaded directly to a cloud server she controlled. No local storage, no delete button, no equipment malfunctions. Her second act was to establish a civilian oversight board with subpoena power. 5 members elected by the community. Harold Briggs was asked to serve. He said yes before the sentence was finished. Whitmore cooperated fully. His testimony helped secure Coleman's conviction, and in return, he received a reduced sentence: 2 years probation and permanent disqualification from law enforcement. He moved to a different state, started over. Whether he became a better man was a question only time could answer. But at least he'd stop pretending to be something he wasn't. Dawson served his time quietly. No interviews, no statements, no apologies. The silence of a man with nothing left to say, and no one left who wanted to hear it. The teenager who recorded the video, his name was Jerome Washington, 17 years old, a junior at Ridgemont High, of the NAACP. He stood on a stage in a borrowed blazer and accepted the award with the same steady hands that had held his phone at the gas station that night. He told the audience he hadn't done anything special. He'd just refused to look away. The video remained online. Law schools used it in civil rights seminars. Police academies used it as an example of what procedural failure looks like from the outside. It became one of those clips that enters the cultural memory, not because it showed something new, but because it showed something old in a way that couldn't be dismissed. Audrey was promoted, special agent in charge of a newly formed federal task force on law enforcement accountability, a unit created in part because of what Operation Mockingbird had uncovered. She now oversaw a team of 12 agents working across 4 states, investigating departments where the complaints piled up and the cameras always seemed to break. She didn't give interviews. She didn't write a book. She didn't start a podcast or appear on panel shows. She went back to work, quietly, completely, the way she'd always worked. But on a Saturday evening in late October, she drove back to Ridgemont County, alone, in the same dented Camry with the cracked windshield she'd never bothered to replace. She pulled into the Shell station, Pump 2, the same pump. She stepped out. The air was cooler now. Fall had arrived, and the cicadas had gone quiet. The awning cast a pale circle of light around her. She swiped her card, selected regular, and leaned against the car while the tank filled. On the wall of the convenience store, between a faded Coca-Cola sign and a notice about lottery tickets, someone had mounted a small brass plaque. It couldn't have been more than 6 inches wide. She hadn't known it was there until just now. She walked over and read it. Where courage met injustice, Ridgemont County, to the woman who stood still so others could move forward. She stood there for a long time, long enough for the pump to click off behind her, long enough for the sun to finish setting beyond the tree line, long enough for the sky to shift from amber to violet to the deep, honest blue of a southern night. Then she returned the nozzle, screwed the gas cap tight, got back in her car. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A new case file, another county, another pattern, another department where the cameras stopped working and the complaints stopped mattering. She opened the file, read the first page, closed it. Then she started the engine and pulled out of the station, turning west onto Route 9. The headlights carved a path through the dark. Behind her, the gas station shrank to a point of light, then disappeared entirely. Ahead, the road stretched on. And so did the work. It always would. Have you ever witnessed someone being profiled or treated unfairly because of how they looked? What happened? And it's... Man. 11 months of being disrespected, pulled over, talked down to, and she wrote every single thing down. Imagine being that patient. Most of us would have snapped day one. She waited, and she won. That's a different kind of strength.